Sleepy Joe said that he's running to, quote, save the world. Well, he was. He's going to save every country but ours. Don't forget, Biden deserted you. He's not from Pennsylvania. I guess he was born here, but he left you, folks. He left you for another state. Remember that, please. I meant to say that. This guy talks about, oh, I know Scranton, I know that. Well, I know the place is better. He left you for another state, and he didn't take care of you because he didn't take care of your jobs. He let other countries come in and rip off America. We would lose everything if we go with the people that you see that are running for office. You saw that. Last night I watched Alfred E. Newman. What's going on with Fox, by the way? What's going on there? They're putting more Democrats on than you have Republicans. It's something strange is going on at Fox, folks. Something very strange. Did you see this guy last night? I did want to watch. You always have to watch the competition, if you call it that. And he was knocking the hell out of Fox, and Fox has put him in. Somebody's going to have to explain the whole Fox deal to me.
The president seems to be upset about this town hall with Fox News yesterday. Do you think that he sees you as some kind of a dangerous adversary?
Yo creo que quizás el presidente no sé cómo manejar esta situación de Mayor Pete. I think the president just doesn't quite know what to do with me.
He's right. He has no idea what to do with them. Mayor Pete Buttigieg answering in both English and Spanish with Telemundo yesterday. Jonathan Lemire, Mayor Pete has a long way to go. There are certain sectors that he really is going to have trouble with, but boy, does he get under Trump's skin.
He does seem to provoke a reaction from the president that we haven't seen from many of these 2020 candidates. You're right. Mayor Pete Buttigieg, though, off to a very impressive start to this campaign, is still well behind in the polls to say former Vice President Biden. He certainly will have to answer questions about whether he can appeal to minority voters. He's polling not particularly well there, again, compared to Biden and some of his competition. But he is someone who the people around the president I've been talking to in recent days has really caught their attention. I mean, they certainly still believe that Biden or perhaps Senator Harris or Senator Warren may be ahead of the pack, Senator Sanders as well, but that he is his sudden rise has really startled them. They see him as obviously very, very intelligent, sort of very well spoken, very formidable person who can move. You'll have to prove his foreign policy chops in particular, and lay out some more proposals, but seems to have a certain talent that the president and the people around him respect. And by the way, it's not a coincidence that the president was in Pennsylvania last night. Expect to see that time and time again.
Absolutely.
It follows up recent visits to Wisconsin and Michigan. They've taken efforts to shore up the local Republican parties in those states. They know how key those states are if he's going to win again. And according to your internal polling, he trails Joe Biden in all three.
We go back to that first clip we showed of the president last night, Mike, talking about Joe Biden deserting the people of Pennsylvania. Joe Biden was 10 years old when his family moved from Pennsylvania to Wilmington, Delaware.
Yeah, at the age of 10, Sleepy Joe, as the president calls him, was forced to make a decision. Should he stay alone in the apartment in Scranton or follow his family to Wilmington, Delaware? And courageously, at 10 years of age, he decided, I'll go with you, Mom and Dad.
Mike Barnicle with the fact check again one more time.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.